Margaret, last Concordia, and first of all, I'd like to welcome this bill. I didn't get a chance today to count all the parliamentary questions I put down over the years as to when this bill would be introduced. It was promised and promised and promised, and like a lot of things, it never happened. Minister, you're less than a year in government and you've brought it in. You have actually brought it before the House, and I want to congratulate you on that, because promises never fed anybody. Promises never solved any problem. Action is what was needed here, and action is what we're getting. Now, I think we need in this state to look holistically at our care for the elderly. And we haven't really done that for many years. And so many policies impact on that care. And one thing that COVID made very, very clear, and it was interesting when a statement was made at the height of the COVID crisis by the Taoiseach of the time, Taoiseach Varadkar, that it wasn't a great policy to put people into nursing homes who could have, in better arrangements by the state and by communities and by society, could have lived independently or lived with intensive support within the community. And in looking at this, the issue of physical planning has to be taken into account. If I look at our rural areas, all of the plans, all of the designs of the great experts in planning seem designed to stop people living in the area from which they came and near parents, particularly in rural Ireland. And I have argued again and again where it's free choice of people to live in the community from which they came, to live near to their parents, that should be facilitated. There are two very obvious human spin-offs for this that professional planners and particularly academics seem to overlook. The first is that in the earlier years, often parents become grandparents and they become a very big support within the family network in terms of babysitting, nurturing, supporting, educating, doing all the things that grandparents can do and that grandparents can do in a very, very special way. And then as the years go by, the grandparents are often looked after the next generation and cared for. And in those situations, it is often more possible to continue living in your own house, which I think most older people wish to do. And therefore, we should think this out again post-COVID. And it doesn't matter what mistakes we've made in the past, there is no need, just because you got it wrong, not to put your hands up, say, we got this wrong, we didn't think of this element, and now we're going to revise our thoughts on this again. The second option, of course, is dedicated housing for the elderly in small clusters. There's a perfect example of that in my own parish. That's a community-operated social housing scheme. It's built around an old convent, which is now the daycare centre and the health centre. It's beside the church and beside the shops and the post office. And there are 8 houses there. Now, in my parish, the vast majority of the older people choose to stay in their own homes. But there is a minority for whom that's not a viable option, and they move into these houses where the services are all nearby. There should be one of those kind of schemes in every parish where you can provide the support, you can provide easily support by meals and so on, although Meals on Wheels should be available pervasively throughout the community. And then there are models of even higher levels of support that are not nursing home care. And therefore, nursing home care should, in a lot of cases, be the last option, but it's one that is absolutely vital and for which there will always be a demand. And some people choose to go into a nursing home for reasons that are good to themselves, and for others, there is no choice because of the level of disability and support that they need. All of these must be facilitated. Now, when we look at our model for nursing home care, I think it's one good thing that I can always reassure people is if you have very little means, you will go into the same nursing homes as somebody with a lot of means. You'll get the same care. And you will only pay according to your ability to pay. So they assess 80% of your income, and you get to keep the 20%. However, assets are taken into account. And this is the issue that we're addressing today. Now, in the normal way, a couple's assets are divided by 2 in the means test. But it's a single person, all the assets are taken into account, but there is a disregard of 36,000 if you're single, 72,000 if it's a couple. And the house or the principal residence is taken into account, and 7.5% of that value is counted each year for 3 years. So the maximum that's taken out of the estate then, by means of a charge, is 22,500 because you can defer the actual collection of this money. However, there was a problem, and that is that family farms and small businesses could be assessed continuously with no cap at 7.5% per annum. Now, the average stay in a nursing home is less than 3 years, but there are many people for whom it's longer. I remember a case near home where a neighbour went into the nursing home. I visited that neighbour maybe 2 years after. I didn't think they'd survive as long as they did, and great thing that they did survive for years and years. A single person who'd be living on their own in the nursing home. Now, in the case that that person had a farm or a business, the amount assessed would have gone up and up until virtually the whole farm or business would be taken away. And for many families, a family business or a family farm is something they effectively inherited on trust and they pass on to the next generation, and they hope to pass it on intact. The other rule that catches people is this, that if you have transferred that, for example, if you had an elderly parent and a son or daughter working the farm with you, unless you transferred it 5 years or more before you went into the nursing home, except in exceptional circumstances, you were assessed with the whole amount of money. In other words, you transferred it 3 years before you went into the nursing home, and you didn't act the time you went in and owned the farm, you were still assessed on the farm. And of course that put a huge burden on people. I've often pointed out to what I would call the double lock system in rural Ireland, where parents at times are reluctant to hand over the ownership of the property. They will it to their children, and for one reason or another they keep their name on the property as they get older. There are many reasons I needn't go into today why this might happen. By introducing this rule, whereby if the successor has worked on the farm, in 3 of the previous 5 years and undertakes to continue to devote a reasonable amount of time to the farm in the following years, I think it's 6 years, that only 3.5 years will be assessed. In other words, it will be treated on the same basis that the family home. Now, what that means is that if the person lives in the nursing home for 3 years, 22.5% of the asset will have a burden on it that will have to be repaid to the state. But that's a far cry from what can happen if somebody was, for one reason or another, 10 years in a nursing home. And at 7.5%, it will be 75%. And that does happen in some cases of various conditions that we can fully understand and that we would all have come across. Minister, there is one other issue, but there's many other issues, but I'll run out of time before I will have covered all the issues I'd like to cover. But there's an issue I'd like to raise with you that I think needs addressing. In the situation that a couple, we say, go into a nursing home, or a single person goes into a nursing home, and they have a private principal residence, and that residence is empty, and you're in it for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and so on. After 3 years, the clock stops, but the house is empty. However, if at any time you liquidate the asset and make sure that somebody can occupy the house, in other words, you sell out the house, you then become liable for the cash you received on a continuous basis in year 4, year 5, year 6, year 7. And there is no doubt at a time of huge housing shortage that there are houses in this country that are owned by people in nursing homes where they're either afraid they have to cash out now, they're going to, after the 3rd year, if the people in the nursing home survive, keep having to pay and pay and pay, or where they've already gone the 3 years in the nursing home, and they'll certainly be levied indefinitely on the capital they would realise. And therefore, they do not sell, they do not make the house available. And this is a pity, because, as I said, housing is in short supply. And I think we should look at a provision whereby if a vacant house of somebody in a nursing home is, after they go into the nursing home, sold, that the proceeds of that sale, whether it happened within the 3-year period or after, would be treated as if it was the house. I think if we made that change, we could do away with the scandal of vacant houses around the country at a time that so many people are screaming out for housing. Reference was made here to the model of nursing home care, private versus public. I think, first of all, we have to say that HICWA does a very thorough job, and one of the very, very good decisions was to bring HICWA into the equation. HICWA was set up, I think, during the Taoiseach's time as minister. Certainly it was proposed at that time. And it certainly is very, very important that such a service exists to monitor on all of our behalf the human and physical standards adhered to within so many health facilities, but particularly within the nursing home sector. Because we don't know in the end of the day, be it private or public, which service might leave a little bit or a lot to be desired in how they operate. The argument between the private and public sector is an old argument, and one I don't find easy to resolve in my mind. Public care is very good, and we have a number of them in my constituency, and they get universal praise. I have to say that most of the nursing home, private nursing homes in my constituency seem to be owner-run, and they too provide top-class services. I'm not sure if we had relied on the public service to provide all the nursing homes that we needed with a burgeoning older population, that we would have met the demand in time in the way the private sector did. And yes, there were flaws with that. Yes, there were difficulties. But I think on the greater scheme of things, the private sector, in fairly wide measure, did deliver to meet a rapidly increasing demand, brought capital into the process, and delivered projects. And as I've said, we have a very strict regime in terms of scrutiny by HICWA. But the other thing is this: because you have a choice at a nursing home, I think it's fair to say that you get fairly fast migration away from those nursing homes not providing a high standard of care. That said, like so many facets of our life, I do not like the corporatization by big players of businesses. I would much prefer the small operator dedicated to their task. I don't know if there's any way to try and incentivize that approach, particularly in line with EU rules that can often be a little bit of a barrier to favouring one thing rather than another. But I would much prefer that, because I think personal attention is very good. I remember reading a document where back, I think it was in the 40s, question was asked of Fianna Fail as to what was their policy on private property. And I thought a very interesting answer was given. The answer given at that time was that Fianna Fail was in favour of private property, but, and the but was vital, in as diffuse an ownership of private property as possible. In other words, they were making quite clear that a lot of people owning a little was a lot better than the few owning a lot. Unfortunately, modern trends are going the other way. And it seems that small operators of every type in social services, in commercial services, in so many facets of our life, are being swallowed up by the might of the euro for those who have a large number. I'm not sure whether it's private housing, whether it's social care, nursing home care, or ordinary private business. I'm not sure that that is a good model, but it's not just confined to this sector. It's something on which we need a wider debate on another day. Gur maith.